Welcome back, and welcome to this final tutorial on how to build the USS Enterprise in Blender 3D. If you enjoy these tutorials or find them helpful, then please remember to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon to be notified when I post new tutorials. Alright, well, we've got some signs left to put on our USS Enterprise, and let's start off by looking at Alan Sinclair's plans. It's not readily obvious on some of the text unless you use the original CAD files, but this is a 102. It's like a 708 or 706, 1800, 1834, and 1837, something along those lines. You can see the placements, but it's hard to make out what they say. There's also some signs underneath the warp engines, underneath the engineering hull, right? And underneath the saucer. Now, Alan doesn't show you what's on these signs, so I'm going to. Alright, now this isn't showing you actually much more than what Alan showed you, but I can confirm that there's signage here and here. This is a shot from Where No Man Has Gone Before, and although it was also, this shot was also used, I think, in every opening sequence, because you see the Enterprise traversing across a planet, orbiting a planet. And it was the shot. They just comped in a different background, but later on, after the titles are gone from Where No Man Has Gone Before, you can also see this here in the middle, 3/4 towards the rear, just underneath the pylon. There's something there, pardon me, and there's something here. Of course, you can just barely make out something here and here underneath the warp engines. This I didn't do so much for the signage, but to show you some of the shots from the original pilot, believe it or not. Even though these were used, the background, you'll notice, is from Where No Man Has Gone Before. But because of the comping and the fact that because of the background that they put in, and the way it lightened the model, they did it so that it looked like the Enterprise was surrounded by this strange force field at the edge of the galaxy. But that's neither here nor there. What I'm here to show you is the space dirt we were talking about and the differences in the shininess of the hull. You can see it here a little clearer. You can also see some bleed through where the effects weren't perfect, especially up here. The entire bridge sensor dome is gone, and these must have been reflecting some blue here and here, because they just, you can see right through them. But again, you can see some of the space dirt, streaks, and so on. The fact that there's like an entire section of hull outlined with dirt along this one sensor grid line here. And of course, the original pilot had different markings on the hull, and the bridge was actually much higher. You'll also notice a slightly different arrangement for the windows, but it's neither here nor there for doing the production version of the Enterprise. There's a set of, well, I used to call them a dual pair of red stripes running down the back of the engineering section. You can see the warp pylons here and here. The fore part of the front part of the ship is this way. The aft or rear part of the ship is this way. And what's intriguing to me is when I was a kid, I did not know that this was actually more like a box. And it goes up and hides underneath the neck. But I'm not sure if they ever removed the neck and took a picture of it. It might actually be a complete box, but it ends right before the navigation beacon in the back. I'll show you another shot here. Here you go. So here's that what I always thought was a dual red stripe going up and ending underneath the back of the neck. But it comes and stops and is squared off right before the navigational beacon. Now, you can actually a little more clearly see the 1837 here and the 1384 here. And although it's hard to make out what it's saying, there's a section here that says tailpipe socket adjustment access or something like that. And I'll give you something a little clearer to look at. Here again, another angle on that squared off section right before the navigational array here in the back, or whatever this thing was. Another angle on it. And this is actually the same thing. I want you to see it's just upside down. When they were detailing the bottom of the ship, they went underneath now and photographed the top from underneath, right? And here's those parallel lines for that box on the back. And you can see where they sunk in the holes for the lights. And they had this red light coming out, which is really looks more like a modern LED than a light. But it was a light back then, that's for sure. Now, further away, it's harder to see some of this detail. This is after the initial restoration when they brought the ship in, when they brought the model into National Air and Space Museum. And they did some touch-up work, but there were some things lost on the model. Like, you'll notice there's only on the outside edge here these two rectangular-ish pieces where we've got three, and there were three of them during the run of the series. They replaced the nacelle, the warp domes on the front with just these bright red, fire engine red hemispheres. But the rest, they pretty much maintained. There are these rectangular squares under both of the warp engines. Although it's hard to tell in the shot, the interesting detail underneath the front of the warp engines was still there. And I took a shot very similar to this. I had two pictures that I took. And to me, these areas and this here looked more silver than medium gray. But it could have just been the reflectivity of the model. I also didn't want to make a claim without backing it up. I went and visited the Enterprise as part of a class trip. And here are those bright red hemispheres. I took these pictures with a Polaroid camera, so please forgive me. They're not real clear. But I did them to try and catch as much detail as I could about the model. It's my first time seeing it. And you can actually see some of that detail under the warp engines that I was talking about. There's the single magnetic flux container, whatever, on each one. There should be three under each engine. And they had this salad bowl with a stick in the middle instead of the original deflector array, which had been destroyed or lost. I took this shot, obviously, from underneath, and this was definitely white. This is a lighter gray, but it looked silverish to me because it really reflected a lot of light. This didn't seem so silver, but this is yellow with red around it. And you can see that there's a square box back here as well. And one last shot, I tried to get as much detail as I could. You could see that the color inside the triangle here is really pretty close to that of the hull at the time. What was different was it wasn't as reflective in the center, and it got more and more reflective towards the outside, or the other way around. But there was a difference. This looked lighter in here and got darker out towards the edges. Now, you can also see the signs that I was talking about here and here. It's just difficult to make out what they're what they say. You can actually see a little closer. You can see there's a 70 something here, and it looks like a 102 and a 1308 or a 1306 here. These are I think the Chris Trice pictures. You can definitely see the red rectangles, and you can see the colors of the different items. These are exquisite reference pictures. Another angle, you can see underneath the shuttle bay, and you can see underneath the warp engine. Underneath the shuttle bay, and here's the 1837. And you'll notice it's the same font as used for the large registry, NCC 1701 and USS Enterprise. It's the exact same thing, kind of squared off. And they did not have the washer surrounding the light here, but you could see that there was something there at one time. Here you go. Front of the saucer, underneath, inspection door vent system connections is right underneath this top gray square. And on the side, on the starboard side, you can see upside down it says inspection door vent system connections. Systems connections, plural. And I had seen these signs because I really carefully studied as much as I could the show as it was being broadcast. But I thought that they were windows because we never got close enough to see detail like this. And under the pylon, attaching the warp engine, you can clearly see the 1384 here. This photograph is by Gary Kerr. He has magnificent access that he has gained access to the 11-foot model several times and made exquisite measurements and taken some really wonderful pictures, like this tailpipe socket adjustment access picture. Now, I always thought in the first season, this piece of paper was, or whatever this is, this decal, was pretty close to, it may have been transparent, but it looked like the same color as the hull. As time went on, under the lights, while they were filming this got crinkly and yellow. I thought it was a light when I was a kid. And here's two shots before and after the 1980s restoration. And the guys who did the restoration didn't even preserve the text. This, again, says inspection door vent systems connections, right? Plural. And this is that same shot we saw before. They changed the color. This is supposed to be yellow. They changed the color of the signs, and they put, do not read this sign. And they put it on in the opposite direction than the original was. All right. So let's fire up Blender. And what I did was I modeled a lot of those signs. It's hard to see here, but let's, if I go to materials here, you can see it a little better. This is that spot underneath the front of the warp engines. Here's the large rectangular square that goes under the warp engines. This goes on the back of the engineering hull. These go on the sides of the warp engines. This goes inside the trench in the warp engines. This actually goes over this sign. This is on the bottom of the engineering hull. And I've got signage for the warp engines. Plus, although these are much larger, it doesn't matter because we can make them smaller. I've got the three different signs that I showed you before. And I made them light gray, which is really similar to the original gray of the 11-foot model during the filming of the Cage, the first pilot. So that's my guess. And what I did was, these were all one item. I joined them all together, and I did a better to show. Let's see here. And I actually did when they were all joined, I had them fitting in here, and I did a UV export, right? And made this 2048 and 2048, and then saved it. And when I did that, this is what that export looks like in GIMP. So it didn't really have much detail. And as a matter of fact, I had forgotten. I went back later and deleted all these internal faces, leaving me with only this one outside square. Now, you should notice that on a lot of this signage, like this warp engine, underneath the warp engine, this rectangle for underneath the warp engine, this red square box for the engineering hull, this set of stripes on the side of the warp engines, and even all of this stuff, the chevron, the circle, and various things that go underneath the warp engines, and even the signage for each side of the warp engines, they're very detailed. I've got lots and lots of squares to compose each of these, and that's because I made them higher resolution. That's because we're going to project them onto the hull, and I'll show you what I mean in a minute. But I used this to create this, where I just put the color that I wanted over each of the areas. And to show you how that works, duplicate this and move it up to the top. Okay, great. So here's my original exported signage, right? And you can see that I've got the color going just a little bit beyond each of the areas. And the only places where it's necessary to have really any detail are here, because there's outlines, like a red outline around the yellow. There's a dark gray outline here. These inner sections are lighter gray. This is white, based on my memory. This is, of course, yellow in the middle with red, and the red actually goes outside the outlines, and the text is just black. And you'll only see one of this sign here, only one of the text that goes on the side of the warp engines, and only one of these rectangles and one of these weird markings for underneath the warp engine. The reason why you only see one is because I have them stacked. There's two of each of those items, and also this large gray intersection to the warp engine. There's two of them, and we're going to have two of each of these. But since I had modeled these, and I modeled both of them, a lot of them were mirrored, I put them one on top of the other. From the projection that I did this, of course I did this project from view so that I could create my UV mapping. It's the simplest way of doing things. But what you don't want is you actually don't want them occupying the same physical space. I'll show you what I mean now. Okay. All right, so there's two of these up here. If I rotate this, you can see that there's two of them. You can see that there's two of these red squares. There's two of these running signs. There's two of these chevrons. I've only got one of each of the signs, and all those numbers, I simply modeled them. These aren't even textured. They're just painted black. Of course, my blacks on a model are really just a dark gray. But these will do, and they're so incredibly small, they should fit on the hull without too much worry. Now, like I said, these here, these were all one item, and I separated them out by after I Control J, joined them. I exported their UVs, and then you go in and you let's see, you highlight any one of these items. I'll show you. Let's go to an unoccupied spot here. All right, so I'm going to Shift A, and I'm going to add a plane. Great. All right. Okay, so I've got two planes, right? But if I look at it this way, it's one. And if, actually, you know what? It's going to be easier to show you a different way. Hang on. Okay, so here, I've got two planes. I'm going to highlight the second one, and so that I can UV both of these at the same time, I'm going to hit Control J and join them together. They are now one object. If I grab it and move it around, right, they both move at the same time. If I edit them, I'm editing both of them at once. All right. After I apply my signage, after I go out and I do my coloring in GIMP and I put on the text, there's a text function in GIMP. Now I want to separate these two because now they've got their textures, right? So, and I guess let's just apply a texture that already exists. Okay, so I've applied a texture. There's a slight difference from top to bottom. Great. And I want to preserve that. But I also want to move these signs around my model. So I'm going to, I'm tabbed into edit mode. I'm going to deselect by hitting A. Then I'm going to pick one. It doesn't matter which one. So I'm going to grab one, B, highlight this, hit P, like proton, right? And then select selection here. Now if I hit tab, I've got one item here and one item here. They have been separated. Don't need those anymore. Now the kicker is to place each of these things where we need them. As a matter of fact, oh, look at that. I could have shown you here. All of these, I modeled all of these at once. I simply kept typing and hitting enter. So all of these are one object. And I cleaned them up the same way we cleaned up our text earlier. I'll put a link on here so that you can go see how to do that if you don't remember how. But I'm going to do the same separation thing I was talking about before. So B, here's 705, P by selection, right? B, grab the next thing, P by selection. I keep saying B and P. I honestly promise you I'm not trying to do an advertisement for British Petroleum. Although, you know, what the heck. P by selection. If they want to give me money for mentioning them, terrific. All right, so now each of these is a separate modeled item. I'm going to Shift, Control, Alt, C, and I'm going to have origin to geometry so that the origin is right in the middle of this. It'll make things a lot easier to handle when we are maneuvering these. Whoops. Okay, great. So my 102, which is the last thing that I put the origin on, I'm going to grab with the literal G, move down here. Next is 704. Grab and move somewhere in the vicinity. grab my, what is that, 1800, I think. 1834, something similar to that. And my 1834, or whatever, grab and move it here. All right, so they're close to where I want them. I'm going to shift and include our model. I'm going to hit Z. Shift and include our signage here. All right, and our signage is really tiny. This viewport color black should be a little darker. Good. A little easier to see each of these items. All right, cool. If I go to 3, I'm sorry, let's do 1 and Z. So I've got my 102 pretty close. I'm going to grab it and center it a little better. Where is my... There we go. Is it here? No. I also modeled one of these lines above the numbers, and I copied it and I put it in place near all these lines, so you can see that they're far out from the hull. What we want to do is we want to move them closer. So here's my 102. Hit 3. And we're going to grab Y and bring it close to the hull where it's supposed to sit. Then I'm going to grab this, grab Y, bring it close to the hull where it's supposed to sit. All right. So now I want these to appear flat on the hull, but first I'm going to go into my object parameters for 102 here, because it's an actual mesh now. And I'm going to tell it that I don't want it to cast a shadow at all. Neither with this. I don't want it to cast a shadow. This is supposed to be paint on the hull. So now I'm going to go into our modifiers. I'm going to add what's called shrink wrap and tell it that the target for 102 is this is our engineering section. Okay, so that's not perfect. We're going to grab Z, move it down. I want to keep it just above the surface, right? Grab Y. Hang on, let's go to 3. Zoom in here. Grab Y. It's in the right spot, kind of. Grab, move this here. Scale Z. Project. There we go, 102. All right, so grab Z, move it up. Grab. All right. Now it's not above the surface, not anymore. So my offset. Oops. Looks like I got to go the other direction. All right. This is now ever so slightly off the hull, right? But if I back out, as a matter of fact, if we include, we've got our lights here. I'm going to go to rendered view. There's our 102, and it's sitting exactly where we want because the shrink wrap is projecting it as if it's literally like a projector with a slide, like a slide projector, projecting onto the surface, right? We just want it above the surface, not exactly flat with the surface. And it looks like with my, I forgot to texture those lines, those bars. So I'm going to make them each black. Okay, so 102 is in place. The black bar is next. Go to our modifiers, shrink wrap. Tell it we want the engineering hull. We want it to project, offset. Okay. And it should not cast a shadow. Shadow is off. And it's doing pretty well. It's right up close to the surface. Excellent. Now, I want you to do that with each of these others. And then come back. The more curved the surface gets away from whatever you're doing, and the greater the angle. You may want to increase the resolution on, say, these bars. So if I rotate this, hang on, if I rotate this in the X direction, so it's a little closer to the hull, right? Bring this in. Now, because I had to do this with 1384, I'm going to first get rid of a shadow under Object Properties, go back to Modifiers, Shrink Wrap, Project, Engineering Hull, and let's go to Offset here. Okay, great. So not bad. Because of the angulation, it's not too shabby. But if I increase the resolution, it actually curves a little better into the hull. So that's not too bad. I'm going to do the same with this back here. It's already fairly close. We're going to shrink wrap, project, pick the engineering hull, offset it just a little bit there, and pretty good. And the same thing with this. No shadow, shrink wrap, project. Project off the engineering hull, change the offset a little, and excellent. A. Marvelous. Now, I'm trying to remember, I don't think, well, here, Shift S, cursor to center. I'm going to pick my 1830 Z 7, and I'm going to hit mirror, although I think this doesn't actually work with anything that you want to read. So mirror, and I'm going to move it up, and there we are. I don't want it X, I want it Y. So it would show up over here, and that just doesn't work. So I'm going to get rid of it. To make them the same on both sides, you just duplicate all of these, move them across, rotate them 180 degrees, and then do more shrink wrapping to put them on the other side. Now, I'm going to do the same with all the other signs that I have textured. Like this here actually goes here. That's again supposed to be projected. Oh, a couple of things here. First, sometimes when you project, stuff kind of magically moves. I'm going to grab Z, move it into place. It should be rotating along the hull. So it should not, so it should still be visible. Yeah, because it's staying the same surface, same distance above the surface with no shadow, so it looks like it's painted on. Now we've got this. And it's actually very tiny. We've got this extreme close-up on the pylon. You can see that this does not quite match up with the 1384 if you put a ruler on here. It's a little below it, and it's almost in line with the end of the warp pylon. So we're going to scale this down. Something extremely small like that. Line it up with the end of the pylon. Okay, so I've got it in the place that I want it, and make sure this shadow is off. Modifiers, shrink wrap, project the hull, offset, and if I was to go to materials, we would see the text, as it were. I'm actually going to rotate that just a little bit. Okay, cool. So that looks good. So now, I don't know if this is going to get us into the Insane Modelers Detail Club, but here's our signage, right? The 1384, fine. Looks good, in the right place. The tailpipe socket adjustment, if you get close enough to it, can easily actually be read and has that gray, which is very similar to the hull, because I think it's the same gray as the pilot hull. Or, if you want to think about it this way, the rest of this rectangle is decal, and the only thing you were supposed to see was the text, in any case. I'm going to do the same thing with the other signs. Okay, I want to show you some of what I did with down here. Each of these is actually a fairly dense mesh. And here's why. We've got some odd geometry down here on the bottom. And I want to be able to see what happens when you project these. So I've moved them into approximate place. Control 7 and Z, and we can see I've got them lined up. But when I hit shrink wrap, project, and pick my engineering hull, it doesn't move for whatever reason. So I'm going to grab Z, and I'm going to move it up, and it starts to apply itself. When the whole thing is shrink wrapped onto the surface here, right? I want to do an offset. Tiny, tiny little offset. And of course, make sure that the shadow is off. You don't want to see a shadow under something that's been painted on. So I'm going to deselect that and select something else that's new and see if we have exactly the same thing. I'm going to hit shrink wrap, project, pick my hull. Oh, it jumped for me. Okay, great. So we're just going to offset it just other way. Offset it a little bit. Marvelous. No shadow. Excellent. And move on to the next. Okay. I'll probably come back to you when we do the rectangle under the shuttle bay. That one's going to be weird. Oh, and I should probably tell you, hit each of these and hit smooth shading. You can do it before or after. It doesn't really matter. All right. So let's see what happens with our last item here. And again, if I tab into it, you can see it's pretty high in the way of resolution. And modifier. Oh, first, shadow is off. Modifier. Shrink wrap. Project. All right, did pretty good. And it stayed lined up pretty well with Alan's illustration. I did have to make some adjustments on some of them, especially when you do project, because it'll actually make these elongated so that they match what you see from here. And you don't necessarily want them elongated like this. 102 is actually elongated here. I'm going to scale Z. Bless you. And that's a little more like the ratio, whoops, that it should be. All right. So now, oh, I don't have everything done. I'll be back. All right. The one sign that didn't work out well for me was this rectangular bit under the warp engine. It gets warped. So I'm going to delete this. We're going to add a cube. Make the cube fit this rectangle. And wherever you have one of these signs that's just not cooperating, you can do something similar. Okay. Now, this is going to be weird, but I'm going to Shift D and scale this down. And do I have more than one? Yes. All right, cool. So I'm going to scale this one down a little bit here. Scale Y. All right. And scale Z. Not that that matters. All right, I'm going to duplicate this engine, Shift D. And I'm going to move this and these two boxes to one of my open spots. So I'm going to move it to upper layer 4. Move. Move. 4. Okay, let's go to 4. Marvelous. I'm going to pick my engine. And I'm going to do a Boolean intersect with the larger of the two boxes and apply. Great. Get rid of the larger box. Now I'm going to take this, do another Boolean. This time it's going to be a difference with the inner box. Boolean difference inner box. Apply. Okay, great. I'm going to move this out of the way. All right, so what we've got is this. If you look at it directly from the bottom, it'll be like that rectangle that we want. But I don't need all the extra geometry. Right? So I'm going to pick the innermost vertices, and I'm going to X delete vertices. Great. That leaves us with a shaped, a curved rectangle. Not that that makes any sense. I'm going to delete the, tab, delete the texture that's already on it, and we're going to pick the red for signs. Do I have red markings? There we go. Okay, cool. And we're going to move this back to 1. Go to 1 where we've got our sign and our warp engine. Now, it's probably in exactly the same place. And let's Control 7. Let's see if we can actually, first I'm going to take off shadow. And I'm going to go to shrink wrap, project, pick the warp engine, and offset it just a bit. Huh. Doesn't like that. Let's use, no, nearest vertex does not work. Nearest surface point. Keep above surface. Does that work? Let's bring everything back in. What's here? Oh, okay. Let's go to rendered. See what that looks like. Huh, it works. Okay. For the most part. What if we grab Z? Let's take off shrink wrap altogether. Grab Z. Just move it slightly down from the surface. Okay, that actually is going to do. So now I'm going to Z. Oops. Oh, there we go. All right, so Shift, Control, Alt, C. Origin to 3D cursor. I'm going to throw in a mirror, turn it to Y, and if we go to rendered view, well, A to deselect, go to rendered view, and we have it on both sides. Marvelous. All right, so now I've got all my signage applied. It's all where I want it to be. Okay. Now, let's see what it looks like. Add back in my cameras. We'll pick an appropriate view. That's a nice one. And let's render. I'll come back when this is done. I had to step away to feed the cat. However, there we go. That's actually not bad at all. We've got our signage in place. We've got our textures in place. We've got all the model bits. Oh, I've got an extra. I didn't notice this. Sorry, I'm going to have to move this in place and re-render. Hang on. Goes on the opposite warp engine. Okay, good. Now that one's in place. I think that's everything. I'm going to go back. Whoops. And do one more render. Go. No more out of place chevron. it's on the other warp engine. We've got our signage in place. Our textures are in place. The space dirt is there. The rust ring is in place. The little tiny details, the lights, the signage, the numbers, and the lights and such. So I mean, now, is it perfect? No. Is it pretty representational of the USS Enterprise as we saw it in the 1960s on Star Trek? I think so. The only thing left is applying the mirrors if you're going to do animation, tying it all together. You could either Control J and join everything, although that may wreak some havoc with your textures. Another way is I tend to grab everything and center it on an empty. I guess that can be the last part of the whole lesson. Here we go. F11, A to deselect everything. 7. I'm trying to remember how I did this. Let's get rid of our cameras. I don't need them, and I don't need the lights for this. Alright, actually first let's see if there's anything I need to include here. Those are lights, there's no model there. Cameras, millions of cameras. Okay, cool, don't need any of that. I just need this. Do I need this? Yes. There's all my signage, I might as well grab it all, move it to 1. All right, great. So the Starship model itself is in these first 3. Remember that we left our warp engine lights and the spinners here because they're going to require additional modeling. Not modeling, but if we do animation, we're going to want them separate from the rest of the model. I should probably put the blinking lights in there too. In any case, here is the entire model. No lights or anything. If I go to 7, Shift A, include a cube, grab X, and scale. Alright, scale X, grab X, grab X, good, scale Z, grab Z, scale Z, grab Z, okay, so I've pretty much boxed in the entire model, which means that the center of this cube right now should be pretty much the center of the Enterprise. So Shift S, cursor to selected. All right, so the exact center of the model should be right here. I'm going to get rid of my cube, I don't need it anymore, and I'm going to add an empty. Shift A, and it's not a mesh, it's not a curve, it is an empty, and I'll just use plain axes. Alright, I'm trying to remember how to do this, so bear with me. I think B, grab all of this, and P, Shift P, Control P, set parent to object. Alright, so I'm going to grab my empty. And when I move the empty, everything moves with it. If I rotate the empty, everything should rotate with it. Oh, whoops, almost forgot. Alright, so we can move the ship around, but what you do is you grab it by the empty. All right. Cool. I say we're done. Thanks for tuning in, guys. You can now... Oh, one last thing. When you're doing renders, you can make yourself a star background, or if you're going to do an animation and you want to put animated stars or something in the background, change, go to your camera settings, right? Basically the render settings. And if you imitate television, like render presets, TV, NTSC for America 4:3, you'll notice that the frame rate goes to 29.97 frames per second, and it changes your aspect ratio. If you're doing things for presentation, just something to show on computers, then 10 by 10 is fine, or you're going to print it out, 10 by 10 is fine. Your resolution is going to be very low. You can increase it a little, and then, well, whatever, however you want to do this. It doesn't matter. If you want to keep your keep rendering it for like HD TV, that's 1080p, so it'll be 1920 by 1080. But to get a background that you can use, that you can superimpose the Enterprise on top of any background, pick RGBA, and then you have to pick something like TIFF, or what I use, PNG, because Blender loves PNGs. PNG and TIFF will handle an alpha channel. That's what the A here stands for. And then scroll on down to Film and check off Transparent. Now, if you render anything, you will get a transparent background. Again, I'll pick something, I'll render it and show you. The same angle we had before. Render. My lights are on the scene, and the camera is pointed at the same spot. And you'll notice that here, under the neck and under the saucer, there's the same gray checkerboard that you can see in the rest of the image when it's normally filling up. That's the alpha channel. It's essentially transparent. So if you place this image on top of another background image, you'll have the illusion of the ship, say, flying through space, or flying through your room, or flying over a city, or flying past your dog, or whatever, because the alpha channel will remain transparent, and whatever you have as the background will show through. But where the Enterprise is, there is no alpha channel, so the Enterprise will show up. It's a neat trick, and it's the computer version, the high-tech version of what they used to do in the 1960s with blue screen. Everything here would be blue. And then they would go through and they would rotoscope it. In other words, they would project an image onto a piece of paper. Somebody would trace the outline of the Enterprise. You would fill in, say, the Enterprise with black. And then for every film, and there's 30 of them per second, 30 frames per second, you would draw that. And then you would film the results. And then you would invert the results. You would create one copy and a second copy that was inverted. And so that means that the Enterprise area would be white with a black background, or black with a white background. And what you could do is you could, say, run the black background with the star background. The Enterprise area would be filled with black, put that over the star background, and you would have essentially a hole where the Enterprise should be. And then you do the opposite. You put the black over the blue screen and let the Enterprise show through, and then you marry those two results together, and you have the Enterprise sitting in the black area where there are no stars, and you have an image. All right. So that's it. Great job. Well done for sticking your way all the way through it. If I was to save this here, my desktop, we'll call this, I always give these things weird names. Okay, so I've saved it, and I can put a background in place when this video is done. Job well done. Congratulations on sticking your way through it, and you should have an excellent model. One of the benefits, by the way, of doing all of this, let's get rid of our cameras. We don't need them for this little experiment. Going to go to rendered. Okay, so we've definitely got our USS Enterprise, and if you scroll in, and I'm in rendered mode, you can actually see our signage. So if you get close enough, you'll get your tailpipe socket adjustment access sign and your numbers, whatever they represent, and the same with the saucer. Whoops. Come on, Eric, stop playing. There we go. Well, I'm going to go back to this. Get in here. Kind of like a Mike Trice photograph. And here is our inspection door vent systems connections right underneath this gray patch. And if I rotate around, come off to the side here, underneath this big gray area is our other one, and which of course faces the opposite direction, just like in Mike Trice's photographs. So I can pull up a copy of that. So here's the real thing, and here's ours. So good job, representational, I think. I'm happy with it, and I look forward to seeing all your spectacular renders of the Enterprise. Thanks, guys. See you later.